Have you ever poured yourself a steaming cup of tea and felt a faint emptiness, as though something essential was missing? In Britain, tea and biscuits were once an inseparable pair, a ritual more deeply rooted in daily life than even the most elaborate banquets. The humble biscuit, small and unassuming, was the heartbeat of countless afternoons, shared at kitchen tables, offered in factory break rooms, slipped into children's hands as a quiet reward. And yet, many of the biscuits that once defined those moments have slipped into silence. Once they were staples of every larder, every tin, every grocer's shelf. Today, they live only in memory. Names like McVitie's Gypsy Creams, Abbey Crunch, or the chocolate-dipped wonders of Huntley and Palmer's, once spoken with affection, now survive only in faded advertisements, in the whispered recollections of older generations, or on Nosh online forums where collectors of nostalgia trade photographs of empty wrappers and biscuit tins. The post-war years were a golden age of the British biscuit. As rationing ended in the early 1950s, the nation yearned for sweetness again, something more than survival. Biscuits were not merely food, they were symbols of renewal, of modest indulgence, of a country reclaiming the small pleasures it had been denied. Each crunch was a declaration that scarcity had passed, that ovens burned bright again, that sugar and butter and oats had returned to the people. Picture it, a tiled kitchen, kettle hissing softly, the glow of a dim bulb overhead. On the wooden table sits a bright tin embossed with floral patterns, its lid lifted to reveal neat stacks of biscuits, golden and crisp. Children squabble over the largest piece, while a father dips his own carefully into hot tea, waiting for that delicate snap as it softens and breaks. It was not merely a snack, but a ceremony, a punctuation mark in the daily rhythm of British life. But what happens to a culture when its small rituals vanish? When the biscuits that once held families together across generations crumble into history? Perhaps the true sweetness of these lost biscuits lies not only in their taste, but in the memories they carried, in the Britain they quietly reflected. Behind every vanished biscuit lies a world of human hands and everyday rituals. Factories once rang with the clatter of conveyor belts, the hiss of steam ovens, the scent of sugar caramelizing in the air. Young women in hairnets stacked rows of cooling biscuits into tins, their movements precise, rhythmic, almost musical. Delivery lorries rumbled out of city gates, bearing the treasures to corner shops and village stores, where grocers arranged them in displays designed to tempt passing eyes. And in countless homes, they became woven into the fabric of daily life. Some names carried weight far beyond their simple recipes. McVitie's Gypsy Creams, born in the 1960s, paired two oat biscuits with a creamy filling that melted against the tongue. It was hearty, homely, with a touch of indulgence, ideal for factory workers on break or mothers seeking a moment of calm in a busy day. The Abbey Crunch, with its sweet crunch of golden syrup and wholemeal, was another staple, beloved for its rustic texture. Its bite was firmer, its flavor less sweet, echoing a Britain still balancing frugality with comfort. Then there were the great dynasties of biscuits, Huntley and Palmer's, once hailed as the biscuit king of reading, exporting their creations to every corner of the empire. Their tins, bright, decorative, often given as gifts, were as prized as the biscuits inside. To receive one was to receive not just a sweet, but a small work of art. For decades, their chocolate-covered biscuits carried a sense of refinement, linking the kitchen table of a modest household to the grandeur of Victorian legacy. And yet, for all their elegance, biscuits belonged equally to the street. Children with a few pennies in hand pressed their noses against the glass jars in corner shops, choosing carefully between sweeties, crisps, and the biscuits wrapped in crinkling cellophane. Teachers handed them out at school fetes. Railway cafes stacked them in saucers beside cups of milky tea. Even hospitals in their austere white wards offered patients the comfort of a biscuit with evening cocoa, proof that sweetness could soften even the harshest places. They were democratic confections, uniting classes and generations. A barrister in chambers and a miner in a pit village might both have reached for the same Abbey Crunch at tea break. Soldiers returning home from service found in their mother's biscuit tin a taste of constancy, unchanged by the chaos of the wider world. In this way, biscuits were more than food. They were a language of reassurance, of continuity, of Britain holding fast to simple rituals as everything else shifted. To walk through the Britain of the 1960s and 70s was to encounter biscuits everywhere, stacked in tins on sideboards, rattling in lunchboxes, spread across china plates when neighbors came calling. They were as ordinary as breath and therefore invisible, until one by one they began to vanish. And here lies the heartache. We rarely notice the moment of disappearance. A biscuit that was always there one week is quietly missing the next. Shops do not mourn, advertisements fall silent. Only years later, when memory stirs, do we ask, whatever happened to? And by then it is too late. Every story carries its moment of crisis. And for Britain's biscuits, the reckoning arrived in the 1970s and 80s. For decades, they had seemed eternal, stacked in tins, lining shelves, carried in wicker baskets from lorries to corner shops. Yet suddenly, one by one, familiar names began to vanish. Not with a bang, but with the silence of empty shelves. The causes were many: changing tastes, the rise of convenience foods, the tightening grip of supermarkets that demanded efficiency and uniformity. Advertising no longer spoke in the gentle voice of tradition, but in the brash tones of competition. And in that new climate, some biscuits could not survive. Consider the fate of gypsy creams. For years, they were the biscuit of ordinary Britain. Oaty, creamy, the perfect companion to tea. But by the late 1980s, they were eclipsed by louder rivals. Flashier chocolate bars, imported snacks, and ever more indulgent treats shouted from shelves, while the quiet comfort of gypsy creams went unheard. By the 1990s, they had disappeared, remembered only by those who could still summon the sound of their crunch. The Abbey Crunch met a similar fate. Its golden syrup sweetness and wholemeal bite belonged to a different age, one less dominated by sugar-saturated extravagance. It lasted longer than many, surviving into the 2000s, but even then it struggled in a market that no longer valued its plain, honest charm. When it was discontinued, it was not headline news. It was a whisper, a quiet ending to a biscuit that had once been a household name. Even the mighty Huntley and Palmers, who had once ruled as the world's largest biscuit maker, fell into decline. Their tins had graced drawing rooms across the empire, their names synonymous with quality. But globalization was unkind. By the 1970s, their dominance had slipped. Their factories shuttered, their once royal legacy reduced to fragments. A dynasty that had exported biscuits to princes and presidents became a footnote in the annals of British industry. And yet, amid the decline, there were flashes of resilience. Some biscuits fought for survival, reinventing themselves in new forms. Varieties of digestive, custard creams, and rich tea clung on, bolstered by their sheer ubiquity. But many others, caramel wafers, coconut creams, chocolate marshmallows, slowly ebbed away, casualties of a world that had grown impatient for novelty. For families, the disappearance was felt in quiet ways. A grandmother reaching for her weekly packet found it gone, replaced by brands she did not know. A child grown older returned years later to seek the biscuit of his youth, only to find it had vanished without a trace. There was a sense of betrayal, as though something ordinary and dependable had been stolen, not by war or disaster, but by market logic. The loss of these biscuits was more than the loss of taste. It was the loss of time itself. The 1970s and 80s were decades of upheaval, strikes, inflation, the reshaping of communities. As factories closed and traditions waned, even biscuits, those humblest of companions, could not escape the current. Their disappearance was a quiet symbol of something larger. The crumbling of old certainties, the vanishing of a slower, more communal Britain. And so the question lingers. Was it truly the biscuits that people mourned, or was it the passing of the world in which they belonged? When a biscuit disappears, it does not vanish without trace. The absence ripples outward, subtle, almost invisible, yet deeply felt. Families notice the gaps in their routines. Shops replace the lost names with newer, brighter packets. Factories close their lines with the quiet resignation of progress. But in the hearts of those who tasted them, the memory endures, sharper even than the flavors themselves. The disappearance of gypsy creams, for example, left many bewildered. For decades, they had been the steady choice for tea breaks, a dependable presence in biscuit tins. When they were withdrawn, there was no announcement, no farewell, just silence. It was only years later, in the 1990s, that people began to speak of them with nostalgia, writing letters to newspapers, recalling the oat and cream balance that no other biscuit seemed to replicate. The Abbey Crunch, too, inspired its share of mourners. It was never glamorous, never flashy, just solid, sweet, satisfying. But when it was discontinued in the early 2000s, it sparked small waves of protest. Online forums blossomed with petitions, enthusiasts traded recipes in hopes of recreating the taste, and entire threads were dedicated to the crunch that had disappeared from the nation's cupboards. Here was proof that a biscuit could be more than a snack. It could be a cultural anchor, and its loss could feel like a fracture in the fabric of everyday life. The fall of Huntley and Palmer's was another wound, though of a different kind. When the Rating Factory closed, it was not merely a company that vanished, but a community. Generations had worked the ovens, decorated tins, loaded wagons. The town had been shaped by the rhythm of its biscuit empire. To lose it was to lose pride, identity, the sense that Reading's name was known far beyond England's shores. What had once been a point of local pride became a story of decline, a cautionary tale about how quickly heritage can crumble when economies shift. Even lesser-known biscuits left quiet echoes. Those who grew up in the 1960s or 70s often recall the excitement of opening a tin and discovering a variety that has long since vanished: coconut creams, chocolate mallows, or ginger snaps with a fiery kick. When these disappeared, it was rarely noticed in the press. And yet, decades later, people still ask, "Do you remember my baby? That question, passed from one memory to another, is itself a kind of afterlife. These losses reveal more than changing palates. They speak to the transformation of Britain itself. As supermarkets replaced corner shops and global brands swallowed smaller ones, the diversity of biscuits narrowed. Efficiency demanded uniformity. The biscuit tin that once brimmed with variety grew increasingly predictable, and though people accepted it, they did not forget what had been lost. But the most telling detail is this: whenever one of these vanished biscuits makes a fleeting comeback, whether in a limited edition or under a new guise, it is greeted with fervor. Shelves are emptied, packets sold in hours, and people queue to taste what they once knew. Often the flavor is not quite as memory promised. It is sweeter, smaller, somehow thinner. But that hardly matters. The point is not the taste. It is the bridge. For one bite, the past becomes present again. It is here in the longing and the memory that the cultural truth is revealed. We do not mourn the biscuits alone, wow. We mourn the moments they carried, the tea breaks, the laughter, the warmth of kitchens that no longer exist. The absence of a biscuit becomes the absence of a time, a place, a feeling. What remains of a biscuit once it is gone? The recipe may vanish into corporate archives, the tins may rust in attics, but the memory endures, persistent as the scent of sugar in an empty kitchen. The legacy of Britain's lost biscuits lies not only in taste, but in the values and rhythms they once represented. The Abbey Crunch, with its golden syrup, sweetness, and hearty bite, was more than a snack. It embodied thrift and nourishment, the balance between indulgence and restraint. Its disappearance in the 2000s felt like the closing of a chapter in which biscuits were both comfort and sustenance. Designed for a nation that still worked with its hands, still valued the honest density of oats and syrup. What lesson does it leave? That food reflects not only appetite, but the spirit of an age. The gypsy creams, meanwhile, carry a subtler inheritance. They remind us of the power of ritual, the simple act of dunking, of tea-meeting biscuit, of small pauses in the day shared across generations. In losing them, Britain lost not only a flavor, but a rhythm, a reminder that pleasure can be found in the ordinary, that even the humblest oaty sandwich could stitch a family together for a moment. The grand story of Huntley and Palmer's offers a different kind of legacy. Their tins, elaborately decorated, were once given as gifts, carried across oceans, placed in drawing rooms like heirlooms. They tell us that biscuits were never just biscuits. They were status, artistry, diplomacy in sugared form. Though the company faded, the tins endure, collected, displayed, treasured as artifacts of design. They are fragments of an era when packaging was not disposable, but a keepsake. And then there is the collective legacy, the way these lost biscuits live on in memory, in recipes lovingly recreated at home, in online communities where strangers bond over the echo of a crunch they once knew. This nostalgia is more than sentimentality, it is evidence of the cultural weight food can carry. A nation's identity is not only written in parliaments and battlefields, but also in kitchens, in lunchboxes, in the everyday sweets that slip so easily into our lives. If these biscuits teach us anything, it is that loss sharpens value. While they existed, they were ordinary. Only when they disappeared did people realize how deeply they mattered. It is the same with many traditions. Their absence makes us pause, remember, and sometimes fight to bring them back. That fight, whether in the form of petitions, campaigns, or whispered longing, is itself a form of heritage, proof that these biscuits were more than products. They were companions in the story of Britain. And so, when we look at today's supermarket shelves lined with global brands in uniform packets, we might ask, have we gained abundance at the cost of uniqueness? Have we traded the quirks and rituals of local favorites for the bland safety of the universal? The biscuits we have lost may never return, but their memory forces us to reflect on what truly matters in food, in culture, in life itself. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through Britain's lost biscuits. From the hearty bite of Abbey Crunch to the creamy comfort of Gypsy Creams, from the gilded tins of Huntley and Palmer's to the countless lesser-known varieties that slipped away without notice, these biscuits form more than a catalog of confections. They are fragments of memory, pieces of a nation's domestic life, small markers of an age when sweetness carried both simplicity and meaning. The story of their disappearance is, in truth, the story of change itself. Britain moved from rationing to abundance, from local grocers to sprawling supermarkets, from the quiet artistry of biscuit tins to the relentless efficiency of plastic wrappers. Each vanished biscuit tells us something about what was gained and what was surrendered. We gained variety, global reach, speed. But in doing so, did we lose intimacy, surprise, and the quiet rituals that once gave depth to the everyday? Yet absence does not mean erasure. The legacy of these biscuits lingers in conversations, in the way older generations lean back with a smile and say, "Do you remember?" They live in the biscuit tins passed down through families, their painted lids holding not only sweets, but also stories. They even return now and then in fleeting reissues that stir excitement far beyond their commercial worth. When they do, the cues and the laughter prove that we are not simply buying a taste, we are buying a bridge to the past. Perhaps that is the truest power of these lost biscuits. They remind us that culture is built not only on monuments and great events, but also on small comforts, on the simple of a shared plate at tea time. They teach us that memory can sweeten absence, that what vanishes from shelves may endure forever in hearts. So the next time you dip a custard cream into your tea or hear the snap of a digestive, pause for a moment. Behind that sound is a lineage, a whole world of biscuits that once were, each carrying its own story. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the faint echo of those long vanished names, Abbey Crunch, Gypsy Creams, Huntley and Palmer's, calling across the years. But then again, is that really the end of the story? Or are there still recipes tucked in old ledgers, wrappers hidden in forgotten drawers, waiting for someone someday to bring the taste of the past back to life?